Hey guys, it's Ken from Cactus Jam Board Games. Today I am excited to talk about probably the most anticipated game in the year 2022, at least for me. And it's a game designed by two of my favorite board game designers as well. And whenever they put together a game, you know it's going to be a good one, or at least in my opinion. So join me at the table here and let's talk about Wayfarers of the South Tigris. Wayfarers of the South Tigris is the newest design from Shem, Phillips, and MacDonald. These board game designers are known for putting together very strong thematic games and in fact having them in series. What I mean by that is their first series of 3 games was the North Sea series and the second one was the West Kingdom. In these games, themes are followed and carried through. The art style is carried through. Mechanisms are oftentimes very different, but those themes follow through all the way. Wayfarers of the South Tigris is the first game in a new series set in the Middle East. The first 2 games, series I was just talking about, the North Sea and the West Kingdom, are both set in Europe. As I mentioned, Wayfarers is set in the Middle East, and specifically, it is set during the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, the Abbasid Caliphate started around 750 after a battle around Zeb River. They took over from the people who were running the show in this area before. The Abbasid Caliphate ran from North Africa through the Middle East up to and including right there at the border between Pakistan and India. It was probably the largest empire, land empire at that time. If it wasn't the largest, it was definitely top 3. It was a very diverse population as well, with people from Africa, Asia, and Europe being drawn into the caliphate as well. As I mentioned before, the game is set during the Abbasid Caliphate, which again started around 750, went until 1258 when the Mongols came through, but they kind of messed things up for everybody. In any event, the game is set during around the year 820, which was the golden age of Islamic science. And that's important for the game. Now, that golden age of Islamic science was a time in which scholars in the Middle East, particularly around Baghdad, were interested in accruing as much information from all over the world. They studied topics like algebra, organic chemistry, medicine, and especially astronomy. Astronomy was important both culturally and for religious reasons as well, and also important for trade. So there was a lot of research and a lot of interest in developing ideas during that time. And I mentioned before, the geography of the caliphate was such that it was kind of at the crossroads. And they encouraged people to come in from all over the world. They wanted that information, but they were also interested in developing trade and developing new ideas. It's pretty clear that the board game designers were aware of all of these aspects of the Abbasid Caliphate because those themes come through in the game. As a player in Wayfarers of the South Tigris, we are essentially officials, high-level officials in the Caliphate. We have the ability to commission caravans and to explore land and sea areas, to encounter people that we find in those land and sea, maybe even recruit them into our tableau. And we're very much interested in the concepts of astronomy as well. That comes through. So all of these themes are part of the game itself and built right into it. So that being said, with all those themes and concepts, the goal of the game is to have the most points. How do you get points? You go ahead and explore both land and sea territories. You understand the night sky. You interact with people that you encounter along the way. The game is played over an indeterminate number of rounds. Progress for the game can be monitored on the journal track, which is the center main board here that's in front of us. Each player will have their own player board as well. Wayfarers I would consider to be a medium heavy game. For those of you familiar with Paladins of the West Kingdom, this game is probably just above that. So it is a hefty game. It will fill the table with all the player boards and the main board as well. We'll see that in just a little bit. And like I said, it's just a little bit heavier than Paladins. I think what we should do next is set up the board, main board and the player boards for a 2-player game, and we'll go ahead from there. Once we're done with that, we'll have final thoughts on the other side, and then we'll get set up for a 2-player game. So again, join me at the table. Okay, before we start playing, we have to set up the main board. We see that in front of us right here with the 3 sections, 1, 2, and 3. These sections right here are reversible to provide some variety, but you'll always start with the left-hand side, having the inkwell, journal track in the center. These are the last positions right here. When a player moves their marker here, they'll actually trigger the end of the game. And then we've got the guilds or the minarets over here, black, yellow, and blue. There's a lot going on with this board. It's busy, but it's split up into parts, and once you get the feel of it, it's actually pretty straightforward then. We'll need to set up the playing pieces on the main board right now. There are locations for all of the tiles that we're going to be putting into play around the perimeter of the board. So for example, we've got these upgrade tiles for the caravan that are associated with land tiles. We've got spots on the outside where they go. You just find the corresponding spot. You'll need one tile, one of these types of tile for each player in the game. We're going to be playing a solo game versus the automated player. So we'll need 2 of these tiles for this position, 2 here, 2 here, and we'll do the rest of the tiles around the board. Okay, so we've got these tiles laid out now, the ones associated with land tiles or land cards, the sea cards, the space or sky cards, and then finally the people cards. Next, we'll go ahead and place the end game scoring tiles, and these also have markers on them for various items that we might want to be collecting, say starry skies and ports, for example. Each one of these guys has a specific location located here. Let's go ahead and populate those. Okay, so we've got all the tiles on the board here. Let's go ahead and place the workers out there. There are 4 green workers. They're going to be on the board at the start of the game. Let's go ahead and get these set up. They go into the journal itself. Okay, each player will have their own marker for the journal track. The human player in this example, and then the automa right here. This is the start position for the journal track markers. Each player gets to place influence tokens on the minarets over here. The first player, the human player, gets to place 1 of their influence tokens here on the blue minaret. And the second player will get to place 1 here and 1 here. Each of the minarets here has a special ability that will be triggered when you spend 1 of these influence markers. Next, we'll go ahead and set up the randomized tiles here. These are bonus tiles that are going to be found on the journal track, and let's just go ahead and set those out. Okay, these bonus tiles, as our journal marker moves across the board here, when we reach this position first, we'll be able to collect that and be able to get that bonus. Last thing we need to do is set up the cards in play. There's going to be 4 cards from each of the decks here. The one that I'm working on right now is the land deck. So the land deck consists of cards representing vistas or cities or minarets. With the sea cards over here, we've got ports and we've got open ocean. For each of these decks, we'll be placing 4 cards out. Across the top here, we've got the people cards, and these are village people or people cards. These cards right here are the ones that are going to be played in association with the land and sea cards that we'll be collecting throughout the game. The sky cards are associated with endgame scoring, and they'll be placed above the sea and land cards that we'll be collecting. Last but not least, we've got the inspiration cards. These are cards that augment the end game scoring. And I'll show you what I mean when we get our deck set up and our player board set up. So we've got the board set up now to play. Let's go to the individual player boards next and see how we set up those. Okay, let's talk about the components that you're going to be playing with. For each player, they'll have their own tableau consisting of a player board, some dice, workers. At the beginning of the game, you'll be given some coins, provisions or food, and then finally influence markers. Each player will have their own supply in their own color of influence markers and dice. Workers, at the beginning of the game, you'll be given blue and yellow workers. These are not your workers. You get to use them, but once they're on the board, they're for anybody. Anybody can use them at that point. Likewise, when green workers become available, they'll be added to your supply. When you place them onto the board, they become anybody's, meaning that you can use them for one turn and that's it. So let's focus on the player board itself. The player board has several different sections here. The very top shows endgame scoring. And I should point out this symbol right here, this yellow banner with numbers in it. Anytime you see that, that's endgame scoring. And specifically for your player board, this table or this reference shows you that with regard to these markers right here, the cities, vistas, ports, and oceans, if you have 2 of any one of these guys, it's worth 2 victory points. If you collect a large number of these city cards, for example, the minarets, let's say 7 or more, you'll score 16 victory points. So it's a way of indicating what kind of score you're going to get towards the end of the game. And I'll note right now, you can make it so that this is a significant fraction of your total score, collecting these various icons. In addition, if you have a complete set that is 1 seascape, 1 port, vista, and city, if you have 1 complete set, that's worth 5 victory points. So if you have multiple sets, it's multiples of 5. Next section is the caravan. Now, the player board area, I mentioned before how each player has his own dice and own workers. The dice are just for your own player board. These come in your color and they stay on your player board. They never go out to the main board. In contrast, the workers only get placed on the main board. They never get placed on your individual player board. Let's focus on the dice placement right now. At the beginning of the game, you're going to roll your dice. And that's actually a pretty darn good roll for a first roll. We're looking at the pip values, and just for organizational purposes, we're placing the pip values in the columns where they're represented here. When you apply a die to your player board, you're going to be looking at these locations at the beginning of the game. So you've got 6 total. If an icon is indicated in the spot that you want to play, the die must come with that icon when you bring it over here. Okay, so for example, this 2 die, if I brought it down to here, I actually couldn't play it in this location. It's not allowed because I don't have a camel located in my caravan in that location. However, I can take the 1 and place it here. I would play the provisions to go along with it, and then I'd be able to do this action. Note, at the beginning of the game, you don't have any boats. There are no boats available for you to play in your caravan. However, there's actually a really nice trick, and I'll show you in just a moment how you can do that by using the blue minaret function and be able to use that for this 1 boat, pay the cost of the provisions, and then be able to collect a blue card. Once you pay for a card, meaning if you want to collect one, by placing a die here and playing the provisions, you can take any of the, in this example, the yellow cards or the land cards. If you did the same thing here for boats, paid the provision, as long as you had a boat icon to go along with it, you could take any blue card. You don't have to pay anything in addition to what you've already paid. Dice placement locations with no icons, say for example these 2, any die can go there. So you could take this one here, place this die, and then do this action. And whenever you see a slash here, it's an either or. So you can either do this action or do this action. These locations right here require dice or a die with a particular icon. So we do have a telescope at the beginning, so we could do this action, but we could not do the action that requires a pigeon. We'd have to find some way to make that happen for our caravan. Over the course of the game, we're going to be collecting sea cards and land cards here. And then in addition, getting night sky cards. Remember, the night sky cards can only be placed above either an existing sea or land card. At the beginning of the game, you are not allowed to take another night sky card because you don't have a location to place it. So on your turn, you got one of three actions. The first action is play a die. So if you play a die to this location right here, you would pay the provision cost in this example. The reward is get a coin and take a land coin or land card as well. Slot it into position, you're good to go. You can also play die to locations like this one here, where it can either get you a green card or a person card, a village card, or say 2 provisions. So for example, let's use it for 2 provisions, and we've done this one here. The second thing you can do is play a worker to the main board. To play a worker to the main board, you take one of the workers that you have in your supply, and you find the location on the board that you would like to place it. There are limitations. Certain workers can only go in certain areas. So for example, your yellow workers can only go with land cards, and they can go with inspiration cards. They can't be used in sea cards or in the village cards. And no workers are allowed to go with the night sky. Blue workers, in contrast, can go to the sea cards and the inspiration cards, but they can't go to land and they can't go to village. Green workers can go practically anywhere they want to. So there's no limit there. The only one they can't go to is the night sky because no workers are allowed there. So on your turn, you can play dice to the spots on your board. You can play workers onto the board, or you can take a rest. And that's the third thing that you can do on your turn. And when you take a rest, you're going to come here and you're going to take a look at this location. And it says, if you have 0 or 1 workers in your caravan, you can take a journal action and you can take a coin. So that's your rest action. If you have 0 or 1 die left over, you can then do a journal action and then collect the reward, whatever it is. In this case, it's 1 coin. You're going to then re-roll your dice, and you can re-roll all of them, including the one that's up in your caravan. And in this example, this is what I end up with. I would go ahead and collect the coin, and then I would take a journal action, which we'll describe momentarily. So previously I mentioned that on the player board, you're placing your dice. On the main board, the workers are being placed here. So you start off the game with a blue and a yellow. Those workers can be placed only in limited areas. The blue worker can be placed in any of the sea cards, and then also on the inspiration cards. Yellow workers, also inspiration cards, and then the the land cards right here. At the start of the game, all the green workers are on the board here in the journal track. They can be placed anywhere on the board where workers can be placed. Village cards, land cards, sea cards, and inspiration cards. When you place workers on the board, you'll be placing them on a card, but the action is going to occur in the space next to the card. For example, if I were to place a yellow worker on this card here, and that's what I would do, I would take this action then. What do we do for this action? We're going to take 2 coins, and we're going to spend one of our influence, or place one of our influence, in this case on the yellow minaret. Okay, so 2 coins and a new influence. So that's what you do when you're placing your workers on the various locations. If there is a worker of that color on a card, you may not place a second one. So I cannot place a yellow worker on this location. However, I can always place a green worker here and vice versa. So if a green worker was here to begin with, I could not place another green worker, but I could place a yellow one. So I can't do an action that would result in the worker that I just placed on the board to come back to me on the same turn. How would that happen? Well, anytime you take a card that has a worker on it, you will take that worker with the card back to your tableau. So 4 actions allow you to take a tile back to your caravan. These are the tiles right here. These are associated with the seascape, land cards, people, and then finally the night sky. How do you take those actions and how do you take those cards? Well, if I wanted a blue tile, I would come to this location, place a worker here, and then I could spend either 3 coins or 2 blue influence from the blue minaret, or I should say 2 influence from the blue minaret, and then I could choose any one of these 3 tiles and bring it back to my caravan. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a little bit. But I could also do that over here with the yellow tiles. Again, I'm going to spend 2 yellow minarets, or I should say the influence at the yellow minarets, and 2 of them, or 3 coins, and then I could take one of these 3 tiles. If you take a tile back to your caravan, you're not going to take that same tile a second time when you repeat this action. You'll have to take one of the other 2, and you're probably going to want to anyways. Likewise for the yellow. Green tiles are purchased with green workers at this location. And note, when you come to this location, you can take a green tile for no cost, 0. You can also get green tiles on the home board, and that's right here, this function, any die, so no marker is needed here. And when you come here, you'll take a green tile and bring it back to your caravan, and when you do, you have to pay the 2 coins. Then for the black tiles, or the nighttime sky tiles, you'll need a telescope icon on a die face. Come to this location. That allows you then to take one of these black tiles for either 3 coins or 2 influence on the black minaret. When you take a tile, they're 2-sided. For some of them, the face is actually changed, like for example, this one. So these are the 2 different sides of the same tile. You get to choose how you want to place it into your caravan, but it must be right side up, and it must be one of these 2 sides. This is also true for the yellow tiles, but not so important for the green and the black because the faces are the same on both sides. They don't change. It's the same face for both of these. And then finally for the end game scoring tiles, same deal. There's an icon on here which can be used for end game scoring. It also gives you victory points, and the tile is the same on both sides. Let's talk about journaling. If you were going to journal, so let's say it's my turn to journal, and in this example I don't have any influence on the black minaret. So if I'm going to journal, I'm going to advance my token 1 space, my journal token 1 space. And if you take a look at where I am right here, I can go either to this location or this location. So what I'll do is I'll look at the cost for the next location that I want to advance, and I'll advance 1 spot. Pay the cost, in this case there is none, but then I get the reward if there's a reward token there. In this case, I'll get 2 influence in blue. If I had gone to this other direction, I could put influence markers on 2 separate cards in play. So let's say I come here, there is no cost. I get 2 influence markers on the blue minaret. I'll add that right now. And then my journaling is done. There's a possibility that I can advance another step. If I had an influence on black, I can spend this influence to advance another step. But remember, I have to pay the cost. Okay, and so I'm looking at the cost in the next 2 available locations. Because I've come in this direction, these 2 locations are available. This location is not. So I'd have to take a look at my home board, or essentially my caravan, and look to see if I had a blue tile or a green tile. I only need 1. If I do have that, I can advance to the next step. one of these two positions. When I advance to this position right here, a couple new icons show up. This first one is, and I'm talking about the one that's on the right, means grab another die and add it to your tableau. This other one refers to these inspiration cards. If you take a look at these inspiration cards, remember these are the end game bonus, or I should say end game bonus card augmentation cards. I guess that's a kind of confusing way of saying it, but let's go with it. So for this one right here, what you would do is you would slot this in on one of your cards back in your on your main board. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so let's imagine that this is our tableau. We've got this situation right here. We've got this land card, and we've got this nighttime sky or sky card above it. This is an end game scoring card, and what this says is that you get 2 victory points for this card. And if you have the most comments in the game against all your opponents, this card will be worth 4. Well, if I was able to bring this inspiration card back, I'd have an additional augmentation. I'll double the score for this card if I slot it in here, if I'm able to satisfy this requirement, and that is I need 4 observatory icons on all of my cards by the end of the game. And right now I'm looking at 2. I've got 2 of them. So I just need to pick up 2 more, and I'm able to make that score double for this particular card. I could pick up one of these magenta tiles. Now 2 things happen. It gives me 5 victory points, and I have another observatory icon here, and I can slot that in, for example, park it right here, and at the end of the game, when I'm looking at my observatory tally, I have 1, 2, 3. I would just need 1 more and be able to satisfy this requirement to double the score. So the icons that are found on these tiles are also counted towards endgame victory conditions. Let's talk a little bit about how the tiles that you pick up from land and sea locations or from the space locations can be slotted in and augment or improve your caravan. So for example, if I were to slot this tile in right here, a couple things. First thing that happens is any icons that I cover up, I get that benefit immediately. So in this case, I would get 1 provision. The second thing that would happen is, if you notice here, I've now added another tile that has a camel. I should say another die face that produces camel. So if I were to roll some dice, let's see if I can get lucky. Hey, I got lucky there. Wow, got really lucky. So in this case, my rolls of 2 give me a camel. Now, what's nice about this is that if I had rolled a 1, I would actually have 2 separate die that each have a camel effect. Okay, and you can slot in tiles look like this, so that this single die face has both a telescope and a camel, which would satisfy this location. So I could actually put this guy right over here and then do this action. What is this action? This gets me black tiles, or puts 2 influence on black. So if I were able to pick up a tile from the night sky area, something that looks like this, I could actually slot this guy right here, or what makes more sense, if I had waited and done this, then this 1 die right here has all the different phases on it. Just improves it. But you can, over the course of the game, fill up your caravan with these tiles to augment and improve the die faces, making it more likely that you'll have a die phase that actually will allow you to do these actions down below here. Again, there's limitations. These tiles must be right side up. Can't have them inverted. You can't have them hanging over the side. This is not allowed for a couple different reasons. You can't have it sideways, and you can't have it hanging over the side, but that's also not allowed. That is allowed. This is allowed. When you have the pluses here, or minuses. You can chain them. So it looks something like this. So if I had a die roll, say of 4, oops, all right, let me try 4 instead. There we go. If you had a die roll of 4, you could use this plus right here and convert this die now to a 5. Use that plus right there and convert this to a 6. And so you can chain rolls together. If I had 2 pluses like this, unfortunately, it kind of it doesn't really help, because what happens is, oh, sorry, I should make this a 4. So if I have 2 pluses like this, I can use one of these pluses to move this up to a 5, and then I'm done. I can't move up any further because I don't have a plus to work off of. So just keep that in mind when you're placing your tiles. So anybody familiar with the games from these designers that came before the West Kingdom, for example, will identify, be able to quickly interpret and understand some of the iconography that you see. So for example, provisions and coins, very similar. It's exactly the same sort of symbology that you saw in the previous games. This symbol right here, this means take a person and don't pay the cost, which is 3 silver. The banners, the use of the banners, yellow banners with numbers on it, I think we mentioned that before, but anytime you see something like that, that's end game scoring. This symbol right here, where if you place a green worker on this card, you will be able to purchase a black card, but you do it at a discount of 1. Oh, let's talk about placing influence on cards. You absolutely want to do that over the course of the game. You're essentially tagging that card, saying, hey, I'm kind of interested in that card. So if I had influence on cards here, for example, this is what we'll use for this example. If my opponent wants to interact with this card in any way, they want to place a worker on it, if they want to take this card, whatever, they have to pay me 1 provision or 1 coin for the privilege of interacting with that card. And when I mean interact, in any way, shape, or form, placing a worker is interaction. They are not allowed to place influence on a card that I have influence on already. And the same is true for me. If my opponent already has influence on a card, I can't interact with it until I pay them the bribe, or however you want to look at it, either 1 provision or 1 coin. But once I do that, I'll be able to interact with that card. Either take the card back to my tableau or place a worker on it. I think I mentioned this earlier, but if I were to take this card right here, this has my influence marker on it, so it's fine. I can go ahead and do that without any additional cost. When I take this card, I bring this worker back with me. So everybody would come back home to my tableau. This would go back in my supply, the influence marker. The worker would join my other workers if I had any, and then I would be able to slot this card in as well. If you ever find yourself in a situation where an inspiration card is something you're entitled to, but you cannot take it, you have the option of discarding the card, taking the card, putting it in the bottom of the stack here, and then taking whatever benefit you would get if you had a worker there. So in this case, it would be 2 provisions. So that is an option as well. There would be times it's possible that you're supposed to get a provision, or sorry, a inspiration card, but you can't take it, or you just don't want it. Maybe it's something that there's no chance I can get the end game bonus for any card associated with this, and as a result, just give me the provisions or whatever else, and I'd rather have that just so I can do actions on my own. The minarets, I think we've covered this one already, but we'll just remind everybody. If you have an influence in the blue minaret, you may spend 1 influence to count as 1 boat. If there's a card that you're looking at that requires 2 boats to actually be able to utilize that card or that dice location, one of them can come from this location. You are not allowed to spend more than 1 resource in a turn, or I should say more than 1 influence in a turn to be able to do this action. If you have an influence in the yellow minaret, you can spend 1 and modify either 1 die twice or 2 die 1 time. If you have influence in the black minaret, and this I'm sure we covered before, but let's just remind everybody, if I have an influence here when I'm journaling, I can take a second journal action. Okay. As long as I can pay for the cost to go up to the next step, I can go ahead and take that action. Anytime cards are removed from play, so if I were to take this card in Tableau and you've got a gap here, at the end of your turn, after all actions are done, and before you hand over the board to the other player, you're going to slide all the cards down and bring out a new card. There may be times where you're going to be able to take more than one card, and so you can't refresh until all the cards are taken out of play. On the back of these two decks, the sea deck and the land deck, they have this special ability. If you have a die that has a pigeon associated with it, so let's say you had this tile in place in your caravan and it's got a pigeon on it, and you take that one for a draw a blue card action, you can, instead of taking one of these three, draw the top three cards from this deck, look at the three cards, choose the one you want, bring this back to your Tableau, take the other two cards, put it at the bottom of the deck over here. There may be times where none of the cards are something that you're interested in getting, but you still want to get another blue card. Well, this is a way you have a chance of getting a card that better suits you. Same feature over here for land card. I mentioned if you have a pigeon on your card, but you can also, if you spend resources to get a, say, land card, you can add on another provision, and that allows you to draw the three cards from here. So one last thing we need to talk about, and that is when you have a worker to bring back to your Tableau. Right now, this is my current Tableau. I've got an open sea, a port, two cities with minarets, and then finally a vista. The different backings of the card, or the bottom of the villager cards, determine which sort of card that they can interact with. In addition, you will find this symbol right here telling you that this particular villager interacts only with this type of card. And what you're going to do is you're going to slot this card when you purchase it for the price here. Whenever you can get a guy or a villager, you'll pay this cost and then find a card where this can be slotted in. You're going to put it underneath of that card. Now this villager, whenever you take this action now, notice I don't have any boats in my Tableau or in my caravan, but because I have this villager here, I can take any die face, bring it here. As long as I got the provisions, and in this case I do, I've got two of them, I'm good. This guy has a boat associated with him. So this die, or that satisfies the requirement. So I just have to pay the two provisions, and now I can take another blue card. So that's how you're gonna work with the ports. The city cards are very similar. Pay the cost. Goes wherever you have a minaret. I've got a couple different places to put it. I'm going to put it right here because it's essentially paid off. You know what? I'm going to put it over here instead. Let's go ahead and do that. How does this work? Well, this person brings with any die roll a camel. So I only need to have a telescope and I'm good to go. Maybe I'm going to get that telescope from a tile that's on the board here. So this 5 now satisfies the telescope, or brings a telescope. This villager will bring the camel. Now I can do this action. So in that regard, I can do that. Next, let's look at this guide. Notice the backing, or the bottom stripe here is gray, and this indication right here, it goes wherever you have a vista. And vista cards are a little bit different. Vista cards are all about completing a task. It's ongoing. Okay, so these locations are triggered. You put a die here and you get to do the action. This one is anytime you do the action, another action, you'll get the benefit here. And in this case, anytime you get a star card, like this one, this is a star card, it's got that symbol on it, you'll get a food or provision and ongoing anytime you do this action, it triggers this one as well. He would actually get 2 provisions. This is a great way of resupply. Wow, that's actually a really nice combination right there. Okay, the last type of card you might want to get is, in this case, a card it's a Guardian card, and it goes wherever you have open sea. And notice this symbol right here. This is very similar to what we saw before. This is that rest action. And we would slot this underneath of here, this blue card. Okay, so now whenever you take a rest action, and in this case, I've got 2 of my die right here, 1 right here, 0 or 1, so it satisfies the requirements. I'm able to journal and in addition get 2 silver, 1 from this card, 1 from this card, and then 1 provision as well. So provision and 2 silver, and I can journal. If you have multiple open sea cards with the appropriate people there, so it makes journaling very beneficial and something that you want to do as much as possible. Or I should say resting, very beneficial. If you can journal, that's awesome, but you can also build up a lot of supplies very quickly if you have a series of cards like this. Okay, so those are the people that we're going to be adding to the tableau, and that's how we do it. Okay, so we've set up the board for our 2-player game, me versus the Ottoman. I just want to wrap up a couple thoughts before I let you go. This will be the first video. I think we're going to stop here for this video. I think it's going to be long enough. Next video is going to be the actual playthrough. We'll be doing the solo game. Final thoughts about the board and everything else. There's a lot here. I totally understand it. There's a lot of iconography that I didn't cover in this setup, but it's easier to just explain it while we're playing the game. When you see the iconography and the various components being used, it's much easier to understand what's going on. But this was just to get everything set up for us to play. I think I can cover some of the other aspects as well. The manual is good. This is the manual right here. It's good. It's not my favorite manual. It is a little bit confusing. There's some high concepts that they try to cover up front before you get into the mechanisms or mechanics of the game. I'm not sure that's the best way to present this material, but I don't know. I'd like to see it. I'd have to see it done another way to really be able to critique it. But that being said, the first time I played it, I had a tough time with this game. There was lots of stuff that just blew by me by reading the manual. It was getting into it and learning the game, and that's probably the best way to explain it and help you understand what's going on. That being said, I really like this game. This one is a damn good game. Just an absolute home run, and I'm very much looking forward to the next game in this series as well. So without further ado, I think I'll say good night or goodbye, and we'll see you next time. Sure would appreciate you if you could give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It certainly helps us. It helps us tremendously, and it doesn't cost you guys anything. And we would certainly appreciate it. Thank you. So we'll see you next time. Bye now.